Okay, so we'll start. This is really easy. I have. We can just. We'll start. I'll pull this one. This is Nightfall. I have probably the only person in the United States, or maybe the whole world, who has a Nightfall, Night Quest Batman tattoo on my arm. I have the Azrael Batman, real big, who Kevin Smith noted to me that I might be the only person in the world, and I didn't think about it before that moment, and then I considered that maybe that might be it. So this whole series was my introduction to comic books. When I was a kid, it's sort of a weird way to get into Batman is when they replaced Bruce Wayne with a different Batman. But this was my introduction to the character, and I loved the films at the time when I was really little. But my dad, there was a comic book store near our house, and I would stay at my grandmother's house, which was just down the road from where we lived, and my dad would bring me comic books, and most notably the first issue where Azrael is introduced as Batman. And I'm not sure if it's included in here, but there was a cover that was, I don't know if they have the image in here. Kelly Jones, by the way, did my introduction again to the love of Kelly Jones. But there's a cover in this series it was a flip cover, and it was the old version of Batman, the traditional version that you know, and then you'd flip it over, and it was the Azrael Batman in the full gold suit and everything. And so I have the Azrael Batman, and my dad has the identical flip of the old Batman tattooed in the same place. And that was really my introduction to the character and my introduction into reading books. And it was fun because in this series, for me, from the time Batman gets destroyed and everything to where Jean-Paul Valley becomes Batman, there's a transition in costume. So throughout everything, you start to see like more and more metal pieces and stuff get added. And at the beginning of this series, where he's replacing Bruce Wayne, he's got these gauntlets, and then he slowly builds up the suit, and then eventually it becomes this full-on like robot, very 90s RoboCop suit. And then he turns into a crazy ass. But the thing I liked about him is that he kills the bad guys. And that was always the thing. When I was a kid, I was like, well, why doesn't he just kill all the bad guys so it's done? And now I love the pathos of like, oh, well, he doesn't do it because it's the morality. But when you're like 6 and you're like watching explosions and stuff in movies and the bad guy, and you have to also understand that Michael Keaton is Batman at the time, who literally in Batman Returns is killing people, like throwing a guy into a bomb and everything else. So I was like, well, that's the way you get rid of him. So it made more sense that Azrael would do that. So he eventually has to face Bruce Wayne. There were more Kelly Jones there. Bruce Wayne comes back and defeats him, and that I was hooked. So that was the beginning of my whole thing, was this. And I have some of the originals at home that I had when I was a kid, and then I rebought the whole series. So this was like my introduction into comic books. So this is Hush. Everybody knows about this book. Most comic book readers know about this series. And this is, for me, was the first time I'd ever really seen Jim Lee's artwork, and it became, obviously to this day, one of the most iconic representations of the character. This is personal for me because when I read this whole series, it was the first time that I started going to like a comic book store on a weekly basis and getting comic books. It was also when I first moved to Los Angeles, or spent time in Los Angeles. Before I moved officially, I was able to come out to LA, and through the school that I went to, sent like talent scouts to LA, and they had people come out to like audition for stuff or whatever, and I was able to go. And my mom and I lived in like an apartment for a couple of months. She took like sick time off of work, and I started going to, I believe it's called House of Secrets in Burbank, and I would pick this up, and there wasn't really rooms in the hotel that we stayed in. It was like the Oakwoods. People might know it as, like, there's a documentary about it, but it was a studio apartment. It was a pull-down Murphy bed, and so I, as a teenager, didn't necessarily want to sleep in the bed with my mom, so I made the bathroom adjacent area. Like, there was like a sink area, and then there's, like in a hotel room where there's sink, closet, and then like toilet is a separate thing. So there was like a sink closet, so I had a sleeping bag, and I made that my room, and I would put like comic book covers all around, and so I would sit in this little closet and read Hush. And so anytime I see this book, it always reminds me of when I first moved to LA and thinking like, oh my God, this is the coolest place. And then people, this is probably sacrilegious, but I would cut out images from the books and I'd put them all over the place. I was like 14 or something. I was like making my room, which was a bathroom in a studio apartment. But that was my first time in LA. It was the first time where I had like a shop that I went to, and the guys in there like got to know me. kid with swoopy bangs and like eyeliner coming to, oh, I want this specific thing. And it was just a really fun time in my life. And so, you know, obviously we can go on and on about the content of these books, but I feel like for me, the story behind them is what has always kept me interested in the character, is that specifically how Batman has affected me at different points in my life and how it's been important to me in different ways. You know, I think maybe some people see my love for the character and think of it as, you know, that the specific stories are the things that drive my passion for it. Truthfully, for me, and admittedly, the reason that I care so deeply about the character is because of what it's meant to me in my life. I was a kid who was a lonely kid. I didn't have a lot of friends. I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to build this other version of myself. And I was terrified of so many things that this character who's facing his fears and turning into this thing I connected with on such a level. And then throughout my life, it kept popping up where there would be all these instances of times where that was applicable to me. And so here I am laying on a cot in a bathroom, being in LA for the first time. And again, this is the thing that was keeping me company. And I didn't have any friends there yet. I didn't know anybody. So this was my friend at the time. So that's Hush. This is Kingdom Come, Alex Ross. I became obsessed with this book in high school. And so much so that I used to like covet all the DC Direct figures, and I wanted to have the whole collection. And my friend Chance in high school, he's honestly the person who went from, like, I had like a passing interest in comic books to where his level of interest and his knowledge of everything, I was like envious that he knew so much about it. So I was like, I want to learn more stuff, and I want to learn about these different artists more. And so obviously many people gravitate towards Alex Ross's art because it's so incredible. So that was for me the first introduction to the like comic book realism and seeing these characters as like, what if they were real people and what they would look like. And I loved the idea of not only that, but when I was a kid, I loved like Batman Beyond, and I loved the idea of where this character would go in the future. And so seeing like this militant version of Batman, and then seeing Red Robin and all these things that were representations of where the characters could go, and then having them be drawn in such a realistic way, it was just so much fun to kind of get lost in that world. And it was my first like reintroduction to really getting into all these DC characters. And yeah, so I collected all the toys. I had every iteration that I could of the book. And yeah, it was obviously, for me, it wasn't something where I was getting into it as it was coming out, but I was able to collect it and get different variations and stuff. And then it got me into the artwork of Alex Ross and buying as many of the hardcover books as I could of his whole artwork and everything. So this is one of my favorites, and I think that the story is so unique, particularly for at the time, to see these characters. DC characters aren't as often, in my experience, aren't as often flawed as Marvel characters, and it was cool to see them so deeply flawed and not particularly heroic in many cases. And seeing, you know, I get annoyed with seeing Superman constantly be the greatest thing since sliced bread, but, you know, seeing these characters and seeing Batman kind of turn into this version of himself that isn't particularly heroic or fun to cheer for, I enjoyed it. It was a cool thing. So this is always one for me that has meant a lot. Many people might, if you're not a comic book person, you might recognize the face. Obviously, it's been used now over the last 10, 15 years as a symbol for many different things, whether it's, I think, the Occupy thing, and then Anonymous and all these other things, but Guy Fawkes mask. This was another one that I got really into around the same time when I was first in California, and this was around the time that the movie came out, and I was an angsty teenager who, during the Bush administration, was like, yeah, screw everything. And I found so many parallels in this, and this is V for Vendetta. It was fun for me to read. It made me angry. All the things that I think that like a little punk rock kid wants are in this book, and I love the character. I thought it was just the coolest guy, and I love that there wasn't a bunch of cheese with this guy's mask coming off, and, you know, too many emotional things that went on. It was kind of this guy had a very clear story of like he got horribly screwed over as a person, and now is going to kill all the people that screwed him over, and became the symbol for the oppressed and the people who were dealing with things. I know that the film is not always loved, but I really, really enjoy it a lot, and to the point where I make pretty much everyone watch it at some point on every tour that I go on. I like the book, I like the movie, I like the whole character. It's not one of those things where I have a favorite of the two. They're different representations, really. The film is not really 100% true to the book, but I enjoy it. I know that it's not the most beloved comic book movie, but I really enjoyed it, and I love the book. Art-wise, I loved the minimalist kind of elements of it. It's so funny because it's been probably 10 years since I've looked at this book, and seeing it just, like many of these things, it reminds you so much of different eras. So yeah, this is one of the best. Go get it. All right, so Batman 66, this is interesting because I mentioned earlier that my first introduction into comic books was my dad buying me books, and my dad's obsession with the character started for him as a kid with the 60s TV series. When I was little, we had like bootleg copies of all the whole show, so I saw all of it. And then of course the movie, Some Days You Can't Get Rid of a Bomb.
Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
Big part of my childhood, and so many people with the character have, maybe they like the more serious version, the dark version, and then they loathe the comical kind of satirical version. I really have a large love for the Adam West kind of silliness, and this book captures that really, really well. So to kind of bring it full circle, my dad started seeing this book come out and started going to the local comic book store and picking it up, and so every time I'd be in town, he'd have a stack of whatever for me. So I kept up with this book by kind of like returning to my childhood, my dad buying the books for me, and then whenever I'd visit them in Cincinnati, he'd have all the books. So I have pretty much the whole series from volume 1 all the way through, and it was fun to kind of have that again with my dad after however many years, to have like a comic book that we're sharing. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's a different spin, obviously, than some of the other Batman books we've looked at. Definitely different than Hush. But yeah, it's really enjoyable, and I like it.